everyone. My name is Jimena, and today I'll be presenting a life cycle analysis of a fox leather jacket. Here we'll explore its journey from production to disposal and examine the environmental impacts at each stage and look at design improvements that can make the jacket more sustainable and longer lasting. The objectives of this presentation, one of them is to understand the environmental impact of each stage, and the other one is to propose design modifications that reduce footprint or extend its lifespan. Well, first of all, let's start with the very first step, where the materials come from. Fox leather is usually made from plastic-based materials like polyurethane, known as PU, or polyvinyl chloride, which is PVC. Both of these come from petroleum, so right from the beginning, we're dealing with a non-renewable resource. In addition, extracting and refining petroleum takes a lot of energy, and it's one of the main sources of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide. It can also cause serious environmental damage, things like oil spills, land degradation, and loss of wildlife habitats. So now, there are more sustainable alternatives starting to appear. For example, some companies are experimenting with bio-based polyurethane made from renewable sources such as corn, soybeans, or castor oil. So these materials perform almost the same but come from plants instead of fossil fuels. Another good practice is working with certified suppliers that follow low carbon and ethical extraction processes. So, in this first stage, we can already see how the jacket's environmental impact begins and how choosing better materials can make a big difference. After the raw materials are ready, they turn into fox leather. This process involves mixing the plastic with a fabric base, usually polyester or cotton, and then adding color, texture, and finishing touches so it looks and feels like a real leather. So this stage is very energy intensive because factories use heat, pressure, and lots of chemical coatings and dyes. And those chemicals can pollute the air and water if they are not handled correctly. And the whole process consumes a lot of electricity. But there are great ways to make this cleaner. For example, companies can use water-based coatings instead of solvent-based ones, which reduces toxic emissions. They can also install closed loop systems, which means reusing and cleaning water instead of dumping. And using renewable energy in production like solar or wind power can help cut down emissions even more. Now we move on to the stage where the jacket is actually made. This involves cutting, stitching, and assembling all the pieces of fox leather, linings, and accessories together. One of the biggest problems here is material waste, because traditional cutting methods often waste up to 50% of the fabric. And on the top of that, factories use a lot of energy for sewing machines, lighting, and air conditioning. So to reduce this waste, designers are using digital design tools that allow them to plan cutting patterns in a way that uses the least amount of fabric possible. This is called zero waste pattern cutting. Also, the leftover pieces can be reused for small accessories like wallets, tags, or even matching keychains. As for the inside of the jacket, switching from polyester linings to recycled or organic cotton is another way easy to make it more sustainable. In distribution and transportation, well, once the jackets are made, they need to reach the people who will wear them. Most are shipped around the world by truck, plane, or what else, or ship. And that's where we see a big source of CO2 emissions. For example, a jacket made in Asia and sold in Europe or the US travels thousands of kilometers before it even reaches the store. Well, Another thing, packaging is another issue because many brands still use single use plastic to wrap each item, which often ends up in landfills. So, to reduce these impacts, brands can manufacture closer to their main markets to shorten transport distances. They can also use biodegradable or recycled packaging, and some even go further by offsetting their emissions through reforestation or clean energy projects. So these steps don't eliminate the footprint completely, but they definitely make a difference in their overall impact. Now, let's talk about what happens once the jacket reaches the consumer, which is the use phase. One advantage of fox leather is that it's durable and doesn't need a lot of maintenance. You don't have to use animal based conditioners or special products like with real leather. However, when it's washed or cleaned frequently, it can release microplastics, especially if the inner fabric is polyester. These microplastics end up in water systems and can harm marine life. That's why users should try to spot clean their jackets instead of washing them completely, which is also better to repair like that small damages, like a broken zipper or a loose seam, rather than buying a new one. Well, some brands are starting to offer these like repair kits or even customization services where you can refresh your jacket look instead of replacing it. This helps extend its lifespan and keeps it out of landfills for longer. So the consumer really plays an important role in sustainability too, not just only like the fabrics. Eventually, every product reaches the ends of its life. And unfortunately for fox leather jackets, this is one of the biggest problems because since the material is a mix of plastic and fabric, it's very hard to recycle using traditional methods. Most of these jackets end up in landfills where they can take decades, even centuries to break down. During that time, they release microplastics and chemicals into the environment that it's a lot of harmful, but there are better solutions. Some companies have started to take back programs where consumers can return old jackets to be reused or recycled. Others are developing chemical recycling methods that can separate and recover the materials using fox leather. And there's also upcycling, which means turning old jackets into something new, like handbags, patches, or decorative pieces. This gives material a second life and reduce waste. So instead of thinking of the jackets as disposable, it's time to see it as a resource that can be part of a circular system. Now let's look at how can we can improve the design itself to make the jacket more sustainable. First, bio-based fox leather can replace traditional petroleum-based materials. These are made from renewable sources like algae or plant oils, which significantly reduce dependence on fossil fuels. The second is that we can use modular design, for example, making sleeves or collars detachable. That way, if one part wears out or if someone wants to change the style, they can replace just that section instead of the whole jacket. Third, durability matters a lot. Choosing high quality zippers, strong stitching, and long lasting coatings helps the jacket stay functional for many years. And finally, designers can use 3D modeling and zero waste cutting techniques to minimize leftover fabric and experiment with creative ways to reuse scraps. These design changes bring real benefits, not only for the planet but also for brands and consumers. Environmentally, they lower the jacket's carbon footprint, reduce chemical and water pollution, and minimize waste. Economically, a longer lasting product helps brands build trust and loyalty with consumers and customers who are more likely to invest in sustainable fashion. Socially, circular fashion models can create new jobs, for example, in repair services, local production, or material recovery. This builds a more sustainable economy around clothing. So, overall, making these improvements helps move the fashion industry from a take, make, throw away model to a circular one, where materials and products stay in use for as long as possible. In conclusion, to wrap up, the life cycle of a fox leather jacket shows us both the challenges and opportunities of the fashion industry. From the extraction of petroleum to the disposal of the product, every stage leaves an environmental footprint. But by rethinking how we design, produce, and use clothing, we can make a big difference. Switching to renewable materials, reducing waste in production, supporting responsible transport, and promoting repair or recycling. All of these steps make fashion more sustainable and future focused. In the end, a fox leather doesn't just have to be a fashion item. It becomes more than a trend, it becomes a durable, responsible, and future forward product. Thank you all for watching and for being part of this presentation.